Hello everybody and welcome to the Northern Real Farming Conference presentation on MSO. And that is farming to MSO, the maximum sustainable output. And by the end of this, you'll understand why there is a sweet spot in farming, a sweet spot that occurs on every single farm in this country. Over the last 3 or 4 years, myself and my team have been reviewing and analysing over 150 farms, and we've got 50 more farms to review between now and March next year. One of the things we've learned is that there is a difference of opinion, different viewpoints, and they come in 4 different types, 4 different viewpoints, and they can be split up into farming focused and environment focused. On the farming side, there are the farmers that are output driven to maximise food production, but not necessarily driven to maximise profits. Also on the farming side, there's the more nature-friendly farms, less concerned for output, more concerned with working with nature, but still not really focusing on the profit, on the commercial side of farming. And we come to the environment side, again split into 2. First one perhaps is where biodiversity is the driver, but they're happy to include farming within the business model that they're trying to operate. And the last one is where people consider farming an adulteration on nature. Neither of those 2 are looking at the commercial side. By the end of this 20 minutes or so, I hope you'll have, as a farmer or as a land manager, a path of least regret. And that path of least regret is about farming with nature, where farming and nature are in equilibrium, and that there is a sweet spot, an MSO, a maximum sustainable output. And happily, we can now show, incontrovertibly, that the MSO, that sweet spot, comes at a point where farming is at maximum profitability and nature is optimised for that particular farm in that particular landscape. So where do we start? Well, we start with energy. Energy is the driving force of every single element of the world in which we live. But it is fundamental to farming. That balance in energy is fundamental to farming. We get energy from the sun, and that energy is converted by plants. Those plants are managed by farmers. And the food from the plants that are managed by farmers is eaten by us, eaten by people. And it all starts with sunshine and the energy that we get from the sun. There is 1.36 kilowatt hours per square metre of energy received on every single farm. That is free issue energy, energy that comes from the sun, and energy that should be driven and used and maximised in food production. It creates what we are now calling natural capital. It is the existence of that natural capital that farmers have to mobilise. But they have to mobilise it without compromising the environment. So productivity on farms is critical, but only with free issue energy. It is this that is the origin of the MSO concept, the sweet spot that every farm should aspire to get to. So let's have a look at that sweet spot in a bit more detail. The sweet spot in farming. When we're farming, and I farm 400 acres in Yorkshire, we now farm 40 acres in North Devon. Farming activities fall into 2 different groups. Firstly, there's a group of farms that try and work with nature to maximise the benefits of the natural capital resources. And by natural capital resources, predominantly the energy that comes from the sun, but the result of that is a natural fertility, a natural grass that accrues from the sun's energy. The second is those farm businesses that substitute for nature and use industrial energy when the natural resources are exhausted or when there is a need for a correction. There are many farms that have disadvantages over that others don't have. Elevation, precipitation, latitude, for example. But when substituting for natural resources, it will require a large element of industrial energy: fertiliser, feed, sprays, vet and med, etc. The maximum sustainable output on a farm occurs when working with nature ends and substituting for nature commences. So when your natural fertility or your natural grass has run out and you try and drive production with industrial energy, food, fertiliser, vet and med, etc., then you are going beyond MSO. The MSO is the sweet spot, and it can be calculated for every single farm in this country. This sweet spot, this MSO point, occurs when on that farm the profits are maximised. But it also occurs when nature is optimised for that particular profit level, for that particular output, without compromising nature. You can't bring in industrial energy without some compromise to nature. So the sweet spot is about MSO, profits are maximised, nature is also optimised for that particular farm. What are the realities of energy in farming? As we've already discussed, the sun is the source of all free issue energy. But it is not only the source of all free issue energy for farming, it is the source of all energy for nature. All energy inputs associated with substituting for nature will incur industrial energy costs: fertiliser, feed, vet and med, etc. And I'll probably repeat it too many times, but that is what is actually happening. But the other thing we have to remember is that the energy that you buy in, if it is industrial energy and not free issue energy, the energy that you use on your farm will be unable to produce more energy in the food products that you produce than is put into that food production. If you were able to grow more energy in the form of food, then you would have created a perpetual motion machine, which you can't do. It's not possible. So if you are using fertiliser or feed or sprays, the energy that you use in using those products, you will never ever recoup in the food production, the fuel, the energy you produce. It is not possible. So the 5 concepts accruing from this information, from this knowledge, is food as a fuel, a form of energy, and subject to the fundamental laws of physics, the same laws of physics that Shell, BP, Texaco, fertiliser manufacturers all have to comply with. Farmers, as well as being food producers, are actually fuel producers and therefore energy producers and subject to the same laws of physics as everybody else. Nature will seek a balance with any land management regime. That is what nature does. It will try and create an equilibrium. And it is one of the fundamental things that we haven't taken into account in our business modelling that we've done within farming. Unless we have that equilibrium, in every circumstance, there will be a stress on nature. So nature is trying to create an equilibrium to avoid stress. So unless you farm in balance with nature, it will be under stress. But not only will nature be under stress, your business will be under stress. It will not be at its most profitable. MSO, the sweet spot, is that point of equilibrium between farming and nature. And we'll have a look at a real live farm in a minute. If you, as a farmer, go beyond the maximum sustainable output point, beyond the sweet spot, or you go below it, you will not avoid further stress on nature. Nature will be stressed unless you are at MSO. Not only that, trying to decide subjectively what nature will look like is not possible. Nature acts in a random way, and the outcomes of any managed landscape will defy prediction. So let's have a look at this managed landscape. A landscape created by farming. All farming, nearly all farming, probably 98% of farming in the UK has created this managed landscape. The UK is a managed landscape. It's been nudged along for 1,500 years or so in the quest to produce food and to increase productivity. And understanding what the definition of productivity is really important when talking about productivity. More recently, probably 1930s, 40s, 50s, post-Second World War, the industry has been forced along a deliver output at all costs approach. That hasn't worked, as we are now seeing. The managed landscape must occupy a position of equilibrium between nature and commercial farming. Managed landscape is about farming. Farming is about running a business. Running a business is about being profitable, but only profitable without compromising the nature within that managed landscape. It creates an unstable equilibrium if you are in balance. And that unstable equilibrium depends upon good husbandry, both crop and livestock, and that good farming, that good husbandry is essential to maintain that sweet spot, that MSO. Let's have a look at a real live farm. Now this may, in the first instance, look complicated. And what we have is a chart, and it's a break-even chart, and it's a break-even chart of a dairy farm. Now this shape is standard from every single farm business that we have analysed. 150 plus farms show this type of shape to the chart. Now they may not cross at the various lines in the same places, but the shape is the same. So what we have is a yellow line, which is the revenue before support. So you've got output along the horizontal axis and revenue and costs along the vertical axis. As you increase your output, so your revenue, the yellow line, increases. The blue line is that same revenue plus support. And as you will see from this, as a dairy farm, they take less support than most. The red line, this vertical red line over the left-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner, are the fixed costs. And so you then can add into that, the fixed costs, the variable costs. And this green line here is are the variable costs that are associated with the free issue energy that arrives or is available on every single farm. Every single farm has free issue energy, natural capital, that if we wanted to, and we do it, we could calculate the natural capital value of that farm because of the revenue stream that has been created from it. So this green line are the variable costs associated with the free issue. The purple line are the variable costs associated with driving production, the industrial energy, the feed, the fertilizers, the vet and med, etc., sprays. So on this farm, the profit can be measured between this point here and this point here. If this farm reduced its output, the profitability could be calculated from that point there to that point there. A significant increase in the profitability, all by just reducing a little bit of fertilizer and a little bit of feed. And by little bit, I mean in comparison to other things that are going on. Now, let me just get rid of that if I can. Here we go. Now, what happens conventionally? That dotted line is the way that your accountant, and maybe you, would calculate your variable cost line. And you will plan your business as though you were on that line. And you can see that the break-even point is here, but on the PVC line, it is much earlier. And if you go after support, then the break-even point is here and here. So the way we calculate variable costs is wrong. The business model is wrong. So every single business that we have reviewed shows this type of shape. Different angles, different positions, but the shape is always the same if you are beyond MSO. Interestingly, if you are below MSO, there are farmers who are still putting fertilizer on without making the most use of the free issue grass or free issue fertility that is available to them. So in this situation, we've got the output at this point here, and the farm needs to reduce its output by that amount that way. Now, the farms that have moved to MSO, we have not got anywhere near the MSO that we have calculated. As the reduction in livestock occurs, and there is a reduction in their CVCs, the fertilizers and feeds, so the MSO naturally moves to the right. So, in summary, variable costs are non-linear. There are PVCs, productive variable costs, incurred when working with nature, and there are CVCs incurred when substituting for nature. Industrial energy. And it is the industrial energy that drives the lack of profitability and even losses in most farm businesses. So on this chart, all we've talked about currently is variable costs. Now they are the primary driver for change, the removing your CVCs. But there's one other element that needs to be looked at that we have found in a lot of farms. And it is this area here, this fixed cost element. We now know that unless the fixed costs before support are around 40% of the output of that farm, I repeat, before support, then those farms are going to really struggle to be profitable. On average, we are at 68% on our 150 plus farms. And we have arable farms at 80%, and we have livestock farms at less than 50%. And one of the problems of these fixed costs is machinery. And when I was farming in the Yorkshire Dales, 2,000 feet, 8 miles away was a little village called Starbottom, and there were 12 farms between where I was and this farm. And each of those farms had a round baler. Each round baler can do, well, let's assume 5,000. So we have 10 or 12 farms, each with a round baler producing 50,000 bales, and the requirement was only at 4,500 bales. So there's a huge overhead sat in the nettles for 350 days a year. Now, in Cumbria, there is a group of farmers that have come together where they do not buy any machinery unless they have discussed it with their neighbouring farmers who are part of this group. Each of those farms, and we couldn't understand it at first, each of those farms had percentage fixed costs of output of around 40%. They were already working their business model to help them cope with their CVC reduction at some point in the future. We are still working with those farms. If there should be a drive in your farm to reduce its CVCs, corrective variable costs, fertiliser feed, but also to monitor and assess and change, if necessary, your fixed costs. So in summary, in every farm business, there will be a unique MSO point. And that is because every farm itself is unique, different geology, different elevation, different precipitation, different management. There will be a unique MSO point which is calculable. The allocation of crops or livestock to the environmental habitat is optimised for yields and animal welfare realities. The MSO can be achieved by getting your stocking rates right, getting your rotations right, optimised for yields and animal welfare realities. The economic yields are maximised, not the volume yields, but the economic yields are maximised. And as business people, what we want is to be at our most economic, at our most viable, at our most profitable. Conversion costs are minimised by maximising the impact of natural energy available and minimising industrial energy inputs. The cost of converting the energy from fertiliser, for example, is so much greater than converting the free issue energy that comes from the sun. The prevailing environment, the habitat, is optimised to deliver fantastic economic value because it eliminates all the practices that adulterate nature. So at MSO, it will be found that natural capital will be maximised. And that natural capital is, in fact, the biggest asset that any farm has, and it can be calculated by its revenue potential. Environmental stress will be minimised simply by maintaining the MSO position. Don't overproduce, but don't underproduce either. Nationally, agricultural output will be optimised and the profitability of farms will be maximised. And if we want one thing to happen over the next few years, it is to be for farms to be at their most profitable. And finally, total energy costs are minimised. Critical at this particular moment in our history and going forward. So if you're farming, if you're managing land, head to the sweet spot. Thank you very much.